There is an episode of The Simpsons that you cannot watch anywhere right now. Not on Disney Plus, not on any streaming service, not through any digital store. It was pulled from existence in 2019, and the people who made it have no plans to bring it back. Another episode was celebrated as one of the smartest things the show ever made, until the world changed around it, and suddenly the same 42 minutes felt like something completely different. Another one almost got the show dragged into a foreign court by an entire country's tourism board. 35 seasons, over 750 episodes, and somewhere inside that massive run, the show managed to get itself banned by governments, threatened with lawsuits, condemned in parliament, and accused of causing real harm to real people. Welcome to Yellow Fan. If long videos like this are your thing, subscribing takes about 2 seconds, and it helps more than you would think. Now, let us get into it. Stark Raving Dad, Season 3, Episode 1. The episode that got erased. There is one Simpsons episode you cannot watch right now. Not because your internet is down, not because it fell through some streaming gap, because the people who make the show decided, after nearly 30 years, that it should not exist anymore. You cannot find it on Disney Plus. You cannot find it in any digital library. The only way to see it is if you happen to own a physical DVD box set that was printed in 2003. Every other copy is gone. The episode is called Stark Raving Dad. It aired on September 19th, 1991 as the very first episode of Season 3. For decades, fans ranked it among the greatest episodes the show ever made. It was funny, it was warm, it had one of the most genuinely moving endings in the show's entire run. And then, in 2019, it was pulled from everything. Completely. Permanently. Understanding why that happened requires going back to what the episode actually is, and what was hiding inside it the whole time. The story starts with Homer wearing a pink shirt to work. Mr. Burns sees it and immediately decides Homer must be crazy, because no sane man would show up to the nuclear plant in a pink shirt. Homer gets sent to a mental health facility for evaluation. Once he arrives, he is placed in a room with another patient, a very large, very gentle white man who introduces himself as Michael Jackson. Homer, being Homer, has absolutely no idea what Michael Jackson actually looks like. He has heard of the singer, but he cannot picture him. So when this large white man says he is Michael Jackson, Homer believes him completely. The two of them talk through the night. The man is kind, patient, and thoughtful. He listens to Homer's problems. He gives Homer advice. He feels genuinely like a friend. When Homer is eventually released, he brings this man home with him. The family is suspicious. Bart is convinced it is really Michael Jackson and loses his mind with excitement. Lisa is skeptical. Marge is politely confused. And through all of it, this large, gentle man just keeps being warm and decent, helping Homer think through his relationships, and eventually writing and performing a birthday song for Lisa when Homer realizes he has forgotten her birthday. The episode ends with the man revealing that his name is actually Leon Kompowski, a bricklayer from New Jersey, and that he is not Michael Jackson at all. He just found that pretending to be Michael Jackson made people treat him with kindness and listen to what he had to say. He walks away. The family watches him go. It is a quietly beautiful ending for a show that was, at the time, still capable of that kind of quiet beauty. Here is what made the episode famous even beyond its story. The man was actually voiced by Michael Jackson, the real one. Jackson agreed to appear on the show, but insisted on being credited under a fake name, listed in the credits as John J. Smith. The singing voice in the birthday song was provided by a sound-alike named Kip Lennon, because Jackson only agreed to do the speaking voice, but every word of dialogue came from Jackson himself. For years, the producers neither confirmed nor denied it. Eventually, it became one of the show's most famous open secrets. Everyone in the industry knew, and it added a layer of magic to the episode that fans genuinely treasured. Then came 2019. That year, a documentary called Leaving Neverland aired, aired and detailed very serious accusations of child sexual abuse against Michael Jackson, made by two men who claimed Jackson had abused them when they were children. The accusations were not new. Jackson had faced similar accusations during his lifetime, but the documentary was detailed, specific, and deeply disturbing to many of the people who watched it. The conversation around Jackson's legacy changed almost overnight. The producers of The Simpsons moved quickly. They pulled Stark Raving Dad from all reruns and all streaming services. The decision was made by the showrunners and supported by the production team. Al Jean, who has been involved with the show for most of its run, made it very clear that the removal was not temporary. The episode was not being reviewed. It was being retired. Gene gave an interview to the Daily Beast in which he said something that landed hard on the people who heard it. He said that he believed Jackson agreed to appear on the show because, in his words, it was part of what Jackson used to gain access to children. That is not a vague or diplomatic statement. That is a showrunner of one of the most beloved animated series in history saying, out loud, that he believes one of the show's most celebrated guest appearances was itself a tool of abuse. Think about what that means for a second. The episode did not change. The animation did not change. The story of Leon Kompowski did not change. The birthday song did not change. What changed was the understanding of the person at the center of it. And the producers decided that the connection was close enough and the accusations serious enough that the episode should simply not be available to watch anymore. This is genuinely new territory for television. Shows get canceled, episodes get edited, jokes get cut because they aged badly. But an episode being removed from existence because of what one of its voice actors allegedly did outside of the recording studio, that is something different. It raises a question the show's history cannot fully answer. How responsible is a piece of art for the person who helped make it? The fan reaction was and remains divided. Some people believe the removal was the right call, that making the episode easy to find would feel like a celebration of someone who caused serious harm to children, and that the association between Jackson and the show's most beloved early episodes was now impossible to separate from the accusations against him. Others argue that Leon Kompowski is a fictional character, that the episode stands entirely on its own as a piece of storytelling, and that erasing it does nothing to address the real harm Jackson caused, while also punishing the writers, animators, and voice actors who made something genuinely good. Neither side is completely wrong. Both of those positions contain something true. What makes Stark Raving Dad specifically painful in this context is that the episode is not edgy or dark or pushing limits. It is not the kind of episode you would expect to be at the center of a massive controversy. It is warm. It is kind. The character Jackson voiced is one of the most decent, gentle figures in the show's history. Leon Kompowski does not manipulate anyone. He does not take advantage of anyone. He helps people. He walks away quietly when his time is done. That warmth is exactly what makes the removal so strange to sit with. If the episode had been mean-spirited, or if Jackson's involvement had resulted in something harmful on screen, the decision to pull it would feel simpler. But the episode is lovely, and the voice at the center of it belongs to someone accused of being a predator. And the showrunner believes the appearance itself was connected to predatory behavior, and now you cannot watch it. The other detail that does not go away is this. Stark Raving Dad was the Season 3 premiere. The show placed it first, in the most visible slot of the season, with the most famous secret guest star it had ever had. The episode was a statement about what the show was capable of. Emotional depth, genuine surprise, a story that could make you feel something real. Removing it from the record does not just erase one episode. It removes the opening chapter of what many fans consider the show's greatest season. There is also a strange irony buried in the episode's original production. When the producers eventually confirmed Jackson had appeared, they noted that he had specifically requested the fake credit and had wanted to remain anonymous. He reportedly used the appearance to trick his brothers into believing he was working on secret vocal material. The layers of performance and deception were there from the beginning, in the story, in the production, in the credit listing. Leon Kompowski is a man pretending to be someone he is not. Michael Jackson, in the recording booth, was doing exactly the same thing. It is the kind of coincidence that feels too on the nose to be real, and yet it is completely true. Stark Raving Dad now sits in a strange place in Simpsons history. Fans who saw it before 2019 carry it in their memory as one of the great ones. Fans who came to the show after 2019 may have never seen it at all, and cannot, at least through any legal or widely available means. The show's own episode guides list it. The production exists. The animation cells from it were donated to the National September 11th Memorial and Museum. Wait, that is the wrong episode. The point is, the episode still has a paper trail. It is documented. It just cannot be seen. The question of what to do with art made by or connected to people who caused harm is one that every generation has to answer for itself, and there is no clean answer available. The Simpsons gave one answer in 2019: remove it. Whether that answer was right is something you can genuinely debate. What cannot be debated is that for the first time in the show's history, an episode disappeared. Not for a joke that aged badly, not for a foreign country taking offense, not for a network decision about content. An episode disappeared because the person at the center of it spent his life doing something the show could not put its name next to anymore. That is a new kind of offensive. Not offensive in the sense of crude or shocking. Offensive in the sense of something that, once you know what you know, feels genuinely wrong to treat as normal entertainment. Stark Raving Dad will always be the episode the show loved enough to open a season with, and hated the circumstances of enough to erase completely. Both of those things are true at the same time. The show has never really figured out what to do with that, and neither have the fans. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And here is the thing about what comes next in this essay. The episodes we are about to look at were not erased. They are still there, still available, still being watched. But in some ways, they are harder to sit with than a missing episode. Because with Stark Raving Dad, at least you know why it is gone. The next episode on this list is one the show kept, one it is proud of even. And it raises a question about sexual harassment that 30 years of cultural change has made significantly more uncomfortable than anyone expected. Section 2. Homer Badman, Season 6, E9, the Me Too episode made 30 years too early. There is a specific kind of discomfort that comes from watching something that was made as a joke and realizing years later that the joke was about something that was never actually funny. Homer Badman is that kind of episode. It aired on November 27, 1994. It was written by Greg Daniels, who would go on to create the American version of The Office. It was considered for a long time one of the smartest episodes the show ever made. Entertainment Weekly ranked it 18th on its list of the top 25 Simpsons episodes ever. Ricky Gervais, when he first met Greg Daniels in 2003, told him it was his favorite episode of the entire series. And then The world changed, and the episode did not. The plot starts simply enough. Homer and Marge get tickets to a candy convention. This is exactly the kind of event Homer Simpson would treat like a military operation, and he does. He outfits Marge with an oversized trench coat and uses her as a smuggling vehicle, filling her pockets with as much free candy as she can physically carry. At the convention, Homer spots the rarest candy in the room, a gummy shaped like the Venus de Milo, the famous armless statue. He wants it badly enough that he creates a distraction using Pop Rocks and a can of soda, grabs the candy, and he and Marge escape in what the show plays as a full action movie sequence. The kids, meanwhile, are being watched by their babysitter, a college student named Ashley Grant, who is described as a feminist graduate student. After the convention, Homer gives Ashley a ride home. In the car, he realizes he has lost the gummy Venus. He searches everywhere. Then, as Ashley is getting out of the car, he sees it, stuck to the back of her pants. He reaches out and grabs it. Ashley turns around and sees Homer, mouth open, eyes wide, drooling at the candy he has just grabbed from directly behind her. She runs off screaming. Homer, completely unbothered, pops the candy in his mouth and goes home happy. The next morning, an angry crowd of college students is on the Simpsons' front lawn. They are accusing Homer of sexual harassment. Homer tries to explain what actually happened. Nobody believes him. His robe blows open in the wind at exactly the wrong moment, which does not help his case. A tabloid news show called Rock Bottom contacts him for an interview. Homer agrees to do it, believing he can simply explain the truth. The interview is then edited so badly, so obviously, so comically, that Homer ends up appearing to confess to being a predator who plans to do it again. The show airs. The city turns on him completely. What follows is a full-scale media circus. News helicopters park outside the house. Every small thing Homer does gets reported as further evidence of his depravity. He slips in the shower, and the news frames it as a perverse act. Marge lets the cat outside, and reporters speculate that even the cat was being harassed. The network airs a made-for-television movie called Homer S., Portrait of an Ass Grabber, starring Dennis Franz as Homer, depicting him as a gleeful predator who knew exactly what he was doing. Homer's friends, rather than defending him, gather outside his house to bid on exclusive interview rights to share dirt about him. The episode ends when groundskeeper Willie, who records everything with a video camera as a hobby, turns out to have taped the exact moment in the car. The footage clearly shows Homer reaching for the candy stuck to Ashley's pants, not for any other reason. Lisa and Marge show the tape to Ashley and her fellow students. Ashley watches it, accepts that she was wrong about what happened, and apologizes. Rock Bottom issues a correction, a very funny sequence in which the show rattles off a long list of false things it has reported in the past. Then, in the episode's final joke, Rock Bottom immediately turns its cameras on groundskeeper Willie and accuses him of being a perverted voyeur for recording people without their knowledge. Homer watches the segment and immediately declares Willie to be a sick man. Marge asks him whether his experience taught him anything. Homer cheerfully says it did not. For most of the 1990s and 2000s, this episode was read as a sharp, funny attack on tabloid journalism. The target of the satire, in that reading, was the media, the way news programs manipulate footage, the way public opinion follows headlines without checking facts, the way a person's entire reputation can be destroyed by a story that is simply not true. That reading is completely valid. The media satire in Homer Badman is genuinely brilliant. The Rock Bottom correction sequence alone is one of the funniest things the show ever produced. The episode understood something real about how tabloid television worked, and it made that observation clearly and memorably. Then came 2017, Harvey Weinstein, the Me Too movement. And suddenly people were watching the episode again with a completely different set of eyes. Because here is what Homer Badman is also doing, whether it meant to or not. It is telling a story in which a woman accuses a man of sexual harassment. The accusation turns out to be false, and the man is the victim. That story, told in 1994, landed as media satire. That same story, told in the years after Me Too, lands very differently. Because what Me Too revealed, not as a political argument, but as documented, provable fact, is that the experience Homer goes through in this episode almost never happens in real life. Men accused of sexual harassment are not typically believed immediately and destroyed by the media. Women who report sexual harassment are typically not believed, are frequently punished for reporting, and face exactly the kind of mob response the episode gives to Homer, except directed at them. Some critics, when the episode got a fresh round of attention after 2017, pointed out something very specific. The episode aired the same year the Anita Hill testimony was still fresh in public memory. Hill had testified before Congress in 1991 about sexual harassment by Clarence Thomas. The all-male writing staff of The Simpsons would have been fully aware of that case. And in that case, and in almost every other high-profile sexual harassment case of that era, the response from the media and from the public was not to immediately destroy the accused man. It was to question the woman, doubt her story, and find reasons to dismiss her. The premise of Homer Badman, that a false accusation from a woman can instantly ruin a man's life, was not a realistic reflection of how those situations actually played out. This does not make the episode stupid. It does not make Greg Daniels a bad writer. It makes the episode a product of a specific moment in time, written by a group of people who had a particular set of assumptions about how the world worked. And those assumptions are now visible in a way they were not before. What makes Homer Badman genuinely complicated, rather than simply offensive, is that the episode is not entirely on Homer's side. Ashley Grant is not written as a villain. She is not lying. She genuinely believed what she saw. The show gives her a real reason to think what she thinks. Homer had been behaving strangely all night. He is a man she barely knows, and from her angle, what she saw looked exactly like what she feared it was. When the truth comes out, she accepts it immediately and apologizes without defensiveness. The episode treats her as a reasonable person who made a reasonable mistake given the information she had. That detail matters. It means the episode is not, at its core, a story about a woman maliciously destroying a man. It is a story about how quickly a situation can spiral when the media gets hold of it. The feminist graduate students on Homer's lawn are not evil. They are reacting to a story they were told. The problem is that the story they were told came through the same tabloid machine the episode is attacking. Everyone in Homer Badman, including Ashley, is a victim of rock bottom, not of each other. That more careful reading of the episode is available, and some critics have made it clearly. But the other reading is also available, and it is harder to dismiss than the show's defenders sometimes acknowledge. The specific choice to make the accusation false, in a world where false accusations of sexual harassment are far rarer than real ones that go unbelieved, gives the episode a lean that is uncomfortable to watch without registering. The show itself never revisited this episode the way it revisited other controversial moments. There was no callback, no acknowledgement, no meta-joke about Homer Badman the way there were callbacks to other controversial stories. The episode exists in the canon, fully and without comment, as one of the golden era's celebrated half-hours. What the episode does brilliantly, separate from any of these questions, is capture something about how media shapes reality. The sequence in which Rock Bottom edits Homer's interview is one of the most technically precise comedy sequences the show ever constructed. The editing cuts are visible. The words are rearranged in ways that are obviously wrong. The show is trusting its audience to see exactly how the manipulation is happening, and that trust pays off. It is a piece of craftsmanship that holds up completely, regardless of how you feel about the episode's broader choices. The Homer S. Portrait of an Ass Grabber movie within the episode is also doing something specific and smart. It shows how a real event, once it passes through enough layers of media, becomes an entirely different story. One where the facts are not just wrong, but reversed. Homer in the movie is not a confused man who grabbed a candy. He is a calculated predator. The show understood in 1994 that this is how tabloid media works. Not just getting the story wrong, but creating a new story entirely. One that is internally consistent and emotionally satisfying and has almost nothing to do with what actually happened. That observation is as true now as it was then, and probably more visible. The episode's final joke, Homer watching Willie be accused, hearing ominous music on the report, and immediately declaring Willie to be a sick man, is the sharpest thing in the whole episode. Homer learned nothing. The experience of being falsely accused, of having his life temporarily destroyed, of watching his own story get turned into tabloid entertainment, none of it changed how quickly he believed the next tabloid story he was shown. The episode is saying something real about human nature there. We believe what the music tells us to believe. We feel what the editing wants us to feel. Homer is not stupid. He is just a person. And people, including people who have been through exactly this, keep doing it. That is a genuinely smart observation. The episode makes it cleanly and memorably. But it makes it inside a story about a false accusation of sexual harassment. And in 2026, that specific vehicle for the observation sits differently than it did in 1994. Not because the observation is wrong, because the vessel it travels in carries weight that was not visible when it was first built. Homer Badman is still available. You can watch it tonight. It is still rated as one of the great episodes by most measures. It still gets cited as an example of the show at its most intelligent. And it is also, depending on when in your life you watch it and what you carry into it, one of the most uncomfortable viewing experiences the show's golden era has to offer. The question it leaves you with is the same question every piece of satire eventually has to face. If the thing you are mocking has a victim, who is the joke actually landing on? Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show did not answer that question in 1994. It has not answered it since. And the next episode on this list is one that did not even get to choose whether to become controversial. History made that choice for it, 4 years after it aired, on a September morning that changed everything. Section 3. The City of New York versus Homer Simpson. Season 9, Episode 1. The episode that history broke. Most episodes become controversial because of something the writers chose to put in them. A joke that went too far. A character who behaved in a way that offended people. A storyline that rubbed a country the wrong way. The controversy exists because of a decision someone made in a writer's room, and you can trace it back to that decision and argue about whether it was the right one. The City of New York versus Homer Simpson is not that kind of episode. This episode became controversial because of something that happened 4 years after it aired, 3,000 miles from a television studio on a Tuesday morning in September 2001. Nobody in the writer's room chose to make this episode controversial. Nobody could have. The controversy came from outside, from history itself, and it arrived without warning and changed everything about how the episode could be watched or even mentioned. The episode first aired on September 21st, 1997. It was the opening episode of Season 9. The premise is straightforward and funny. Barney Gumble, who has been designated as the group's driver for a night out, gets extremely drunk anyway, steals Homer's car, and somehow ends up driving it to New York City, where he abandons it and cannot remember where he left it. Homer gets a notice in the mail 2 months later saying his car is parked illegally at the World Trade Center Plaza and has been collecting parking tickets. If he does not deal with it within 72 hours, the city will throw it in the East River at his expense. Homer hates New York. The episode explains why through a flashback. The last time Homer visited the city, he was robbed, chased by a pimp, and fell into a sewer where something attacked him. He does not want to go back, but he has no choice. So the family loads into a bus and heads to Manhattan. Once they arrive, Marge and the kids go off to enjoy the city while Homer heads to the World Trade Center to deal with his car. He finds the car sitting in the plaza with a boot on one of the wheels, a metal clamp that prevents the car from moving until the owner pays the outstanding tickets. Homer calls the number on the boot and is told he needs to wait at the car between 9 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon for an officer to come remove it. So Homer waits. And waits, and waits. He needs to use the bathroom desperately. The only bathrooms in range are inside the North Tower and the South Tower, and every time he runs into one, he comes back to find another ticket on his car. His day becomes one long, miserable loop of waiting and running and failing. Meanwhile, Marge and the kids are having a genuinely wonderful time. Bart visits the offices of Mad Magazine and meets the staff. Lisa sees a Broadway musical. The contrast between their New York and Homer's New York is the comedic engine of the episode. One family, 2 completely different cities. The episode is very good. Critics praised it. Fans loved it. IGN named it the best episode of Season 9. The musical number in it, called You're Checkin' In, a parody of a Broadway show about a celebrity going to drug rehabilitation, won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Original Music and Lyrics. The episode introduced Duffman, the mascot for Homer's favorite beer brand, who would go on to become one of the show's most beloved recurring characters. By any measure, it was a strong, funny, well-made piece of television. Then, September 11th, 2001 happened. The attacks on the World Trade Center changed the episode's entire existence in a single morning. The buildings that Homer had spent most of the episode running in and out of, the plaza where his car sat for the entire second act, the towers visible in the background of shot after shot, those buildings were gone. Thousands of people had died in them. The country was in grief on a scale that had no recent comparison. And here was a Simpsons episode in which the World Trade Center was essentially the main location, and one of the jokes involved a man in Tower 2 shouting that the people in Tower 1 were all jerks. That line, "They stick all the jerks in Tower 1," was the one the producers focused on most directly. Co-executive producer Bill Oakley later said, on the record, that the line was regrettable. Not offensive in the way it was originally written, it was just a quick joke about 2 neighbors arguing across buildings. But in the context of what those buildings now represented, the joke felt impossible to leave in without it seeming careless in a way nobody wanted to be careless. Fox pulled the episode from syndication. It did not air in the United States in reruns for years. In the United Kingdom, the BBC had been scheduled to begin airing Season 9 shortly after September 11th, and pulled the episode before it could air. Sky One, the British satellite channel, eventually showed it again in August 2005, almost 4 years after the attacks, but cut several shots of the towers before doing so. The episode did not return to syndication in the United States until around 2006, and even then it came back in an edited form in some markets. The show's producers were not legally required to pull it. Nobody told them they had to. They made the choice themselves, out of what they described as basic decency. Al Jean, the longtime showrunner, said in an interview years later that he completely understood if stations wanted to pull episodes that contained nuclear jokes after the Fukushima disaster in Japan in 2011, showing that the producers had developed a general philosophy about this kind of situation. When real-world tragedy intersects with comedy built around similar imagery, you step back. The strangest part of the episode's second life, after it came back into rotation, is the conspiracy theory that grew up around it. In one scene, Lisa holds up a brochure advertising bus tickets to New York for $9. The brochure has a picture of the New York skyline on it, and in that picture, the Twin Towers are visible. The towers are tall and rectangular. The number 9 is to their left. Some people, looking at this image, noted that the 9 next to the two towers looked like the date September 11th, the 9th month of the year, and two towers that together resemble the number 11. This theory spread widely on the internet. It became one of the most shared examples of the idea that The Simpsons had somehow predicted the September 11th attacks years before they happened. Bill Oakley addressed this directly. He said the $9 fare was chosen because it was a comically cheap price for a bus ticket. He said the artist who made the brochure logically used a silhouette of New York City because it was a New York bus ticket. He said he signed off on the design himself, and it never crossed anyone's mind that it could be read as anything other than a cheap New York brochure. Then he acknowledged that it is genuinely strange to be associated with, given that this was, as he put it, the only episode of any series that ever had an entire act full of World Trade Center jokes. That last part is worth pausing on. Not the conspiracy. The simple fact. This was, among all the television ever made, the one episode most thoroughly built around the World Trade Center as a comedy location. The plaza, the towers, the bathrooms, the parking situation, the view from the buildings, all of it was there because the producers wanted to put Homer in a recognizable, widely known New York location that would be funny as a source of misery for him. The towers were chosen because everyone knew what they were, and then everyone knew what they were for a completely different reason. The episode also contains another moment that got quietly edited out in some versions. At the Statue of Liberty, Bart shouts to a passing boat of immigrants that the country is full and they should leave. In the original, the ship's captain responds and turns the boat around. In the edited version, the line is cut, and the scene just shows the immigrants without any response, which, as some viewers noted, actually makes it seem harsher rather than less harsh, because without the joke, the moment just sits there uncomfortably. What happened to this episode is genuinely different from what happens to most controversial television. Usually, a show creates the controversy. The show makes a choice, people react to the choice, and the discussion is about that choice. Here, the show made a perfectly reasonable creative decision, put Homer in a famous New York location and make his life difficult there, and then the world made that decision mean something completely different. The writers had no say in it. The episode did not change. History changed around it. That raises a question about comedy that does not have an easy answer. Comedy is almost always built around a specific moment in time. It assumes certain things about the world. It expects you to be standing in a particular place when you receive it. When the world moves, when the context shifts dramatically enough, some comedy stops working not because it was wrong, but because the ground under it is no longer there. The World Trade Center jokes in this episode were not mean-spirited. They were not irresponsible. They were just jokes about a building. And then the building became something else entirely in the world's memory, and the jokes could not survive that transformation. By 2006, the episode was mostly back. By 2019, it was available on Disney+. By now, you can watch it. People watch it. Some of them find it genuinely funny. Some of them find it strange to watch. Some of them were not alive when the attacks happened and experienced the whole thing completely differently from people who remember that morning. The episode is still good. The Homer storyline is still one of the funniest extended sequences of misery the show ever built. The musical number is still brilliant. Duffman is still a great addition to the show's world. None of the actual quality of the episode went anywhere, but it is the only Simpsons episode that became controversial without anyone deciding to make it controversial. History did that. History arrived without being invited and changed what the episode meant and who could laugh at it and under what circumstances. And once history does something like that to a piece of comedy, it can be undone a little. You can put the episode back in rotation. You can watch it again. You can appreciate what it was trying to do. But it cannot be fully undone. The weight stays in the room. The City of New York versus Homer Simpson was pulled because of grief, because of respect, because of a decision the producers made voluntarily to recognize that comedy and catastrophe cannot always share the same space, at least not immediately, and sometimes not ever. Every episode we have looked at so far became impossible to watch simply without extra weight sitting on top of it. One, because of who made it. One, because of what it assumed about the world. This one, because of what the world did to it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section is about an episode that caused its controversy in a completely different direction. Not by getting tangled up in historical events, but by spending 30 years slowly burning a real community of people who saw themselves reduced to a single accent and a single joke, and were told to be grateful for it. Section 4. The Apu Problem. Much Apu about nothing, and the long shadow of a caricature. There is a specific kind of harm that does not announce itself. It does not arrive in one moment that everyone can point to and agree was wrong. It builds slowly, over years, through repetition, through laughter, through a character becoming so familiar that people stop questioning what that character is actually doing to the people it represents. The harm becomes part of the furniture. It gets comfortable. And by the time someone finally says out loud that it has been there all along, causing damage all along, a significant number of people respond by asking why anyone is making such a big deal out of a cartoon. That is the story of Apu Nahasapima and it is worth telling carefully because it is more complicated than either side of the argument usually admits. Apu first appeared in the very first season of The Simpsons. He is the owner and operator of the Quickie Mart, the convenience store where Homer and the residents of Springfield buy their snacks, their beer, and whatever else they need at odd hours. He is hardworking, cheerful, polite, and almost impossibly patient with the people around him. He has a PhD in computer science from the Calcutta Institute of Technology, which he earned in a record time that the other students resented. He eventually gets married in a traditional arranged ceremony, has 8 children, struggles with the weight of running a business and maintaining a family, and faces various hardships over the course of the show's run, with the same steady good humor he brings to everything. He also speaks in a very thick Indian accent, performed by a white American actor named Hank Azaria, and for a very long time he was the only Indian character most American children saw on television at all. That last detail is the one that changes the entire conversation. If there had been 50 Indian characters on American television in the 1990s, Apu would have been one voice among many. Some broad, some specific, some fully formed, some thin. He would have been a data point. But he was not a data point. For a large portion of the 1990s and into the 2000s, Apu Nahasapi Mapetalan was the Indian character on American television. He was the reference point. He was what millions of American children reached for when they thought of what an Indian person was like. And what they grabbed was a thick accent, a convenience store, and a catchphrase. "Thank you, come again," that followed real Indian and South Asian people around in their actual lives, shouted at them by kids in school hallways and by strangers in public spaces, used as a way of reducing them to a punchline. Hari Kondabolu is a comedian who was born in New York to Indian immigrant parents. He grew up watching The Simpsons and loved it. He has said clearly and repeatedly that he loved the show, that it shaped his sense of humor, that he genuinely cares about it. He is not someone who set out to destroy something he hated. He set out to ask a hard question about something he loved. In 2017, Kondabolu released a documentary called The Problem with Apu on the True TV network. 250,000 people watched it on its first broadcast. The documentary is not a simple attack on the show. It is a careful examination of what Apu's character did to real people over the course of 30 years. Kondabolu interviews a wide range of South Asian actors and comedians about their experiences growing up with Apu as their only television representation. Nearly every person he asks about being compared to Apu confirms that it happened. The comparisons were not compliments. They were a way of flattening a person into a cartoon. Kondabolu himself said something in interviews around the documentary that cuts to the heart of it. He described Apu as a white guy doing an impression of a white guy making fun of his father. That is a specific and precise way of saying something important. Hank Azaria, who is of Sephardic Jewish descent, developed the Apu voice partly by listening to the Peter Sellers film The Party, in which Sellers, a white British actor, plays an Indian character using an exaggerated accent. Azaria then built his own version of that voice for a cartoon character who would be heard by millions of American children every week for decades. The distance between the original source and the final product passed through multiple layers of imitation, and at no point in that process was an actual Indian person asked whether the result was accurate, fair, or harmful. The show had been aware of murmurs about Apu for years before the documentary came out. In 2016, before the documentary aired, the show had actually attempted to address some of the concern with an episode called Much Apu About Something, in which Apu's nephew visits Springfield. The nephew, voiced by an actual Indian American actor named Utkarsh Ambudkar, speaks without a thick accent, pushes back on some of Apu's more old-fashioned qualities, and generally represents a more modern and rounded version of an Indian American man. It was the show trying to show that it understood the criticism and was capable of evolving. Ambudkar was not satisfied with what made it to screen. He had hoped the episode would go further. He felt that after the cameras stopped and the editing happened, the episode pulled back from its own point. He was not alone in feeling that the gesture, while genuine, did not go far enough. Then the documentary came out, and The Simpsons responded in a way that made everything significantly worse. In April 2018, the show aired an episode called No Good Read Goes Unpunished. In the episode, Marge finds a book she loved as a child and tries to share it with Lisa. They discover together that the book contains things that are now considered harmful, dated attitudes, and offensive depictions. Marge tries to rewrite the book to fix these problems. Lisa finds the revised version boring. Marge asks what you are supposed to do when something you love turns out to have things in it you cannot defend. Lisa turns to the camera, breaking the fourth wall, speaking directly to the audience, and says that something that started decades ago and was applauded and thought of as inoffensive is now considered politically incorrect, and asks what anyone can do about it. Then the camera cuts to a picture of Apu on the wall with the words, "Do not have a cow, man," written on it. The characters look at the picture. Then they say the issue will be dealt with later, if it gets dealt with at all. Kondabolu said he was saddened by the response. That is a measured way of putting it. What the show had done was use its own platform to suggest that the criticism of Apu was simply political correctness arriving late to something that had always been fine, and that there was no real answer available. It framed a 30-year pattern of racial harm as an unanswerable philosophical puzzle rather than a creative decision that had real consequences for real people. The people who made the show essentially shrugged on screen. The broader fan debate that followed was loud and divided. A significant number of viewers argued that the show makes fun of everyone. Scottish people through Groundskeeper Willie, Italian people through Fat Tony, French people, British people, literally every group that passes through Springfield, and that singling out Apu was inconsistent. If Homer Simpson can be a lazy, dim, beer-drinking stereotype of an American man without causing a national conversation, why does Apu require one? The answer to that question, which Kondabolu and others gave clearly, is about numbers. There were plenty of other white American father characters on television in the 1990s to balance out Homer Simpson. Homer was one version of a type that had many other versions available. Apu was not one Indian character among many. He was the Indian character. When a single character carries the entire weight of a community's representation in a medium, that character's flaws do not sit alongside other versions of that community. They define the community in the audience's mind. That is a different kind of problem than a cartoon exaggerating the flaws of a group that has plenty of other images available. The show eventually moved. In January 2020, Hank Azaria announced that he would no longer voice Apu. He said that he and the production team had agreed that stepping away was the right thing to do. He had spent time reading about the issue, attending events focused on racism and representation, and speaking with Indian American colleagues, including Utkarsh Ambudkar. In June 2020, In the same period following the death of George Floyd and the widespread conversation about race in America that followed, the show's producers announced that going forward, non-white characters on the show would no longer be voiced by white actors. Azaria went further than just stepping down. In 2021, he appeared on a podcast and apologized directly. He apologized for his participation in racism. He said the experience of engaging seriously with the criticism had changed how he understood what he had been doing for decades. He reached out personally to Indian American people who had been affected by the character and apologized to them directly. By most accounts, those conversations were genuine. Apu has barely appeared in the show since. He has had almost no lines, the show has not written him out officially, but he has effectively been made invisible. Whether that is the right solution is itself debatable. Some people argued that removing him entirely erases whatever complexity the character had developed over 3 decades, and that a better answer would have been to recast the role with an Indian actor and give the character room to grow. Others felt that the character had been defined so thoroughly by the accent and the caricature that no amount of new writing could fully separate him from what he had been. The episode that sits at the center of this section, Much Apu About Nothing from Season 7, is actually one of the better Apu episodes the show produced. It aired in 1996. The story involves Springfield passing a law that would deport illegal immigrants, and Apu revealing to Homer that he himself is in the country illegally. Homer helps Apu study for his citizenship test. Apu becomes an American citizen. The episode treats his desire to stay in the country seriously, gives him real emotional stakes, and ends with him as a full citizen standing in front of an American flag. It is a warm and well-intentioned episode. And it still features Hank Azaria performing a thick Indian accent that Azaria himself later said he is sorry for. That is the impossible tension at the center of all of this. Some Apu episodes are genuinely good. Some give him depth and humanity and treat his life with care. The writers were not trying to harm anyone. They were, in many cases, trying to do the opposite. But the voice, the accent, the single convenience store, the catchphrase, those things did their work regardless of the intentions behind the better episodes. Intent and impact are different things. The show's producers eventually came to understand that distinction. It took them 30 years and a documentary and an apology from a cast member to get there. The Apu controversy is not a simple story of a show being caught doing something obviously wrong and refusing to fix it. It is a more uncomfortable story about how something can cause real harm for a very long time inside a framework that also contains genuine warmth, real craft, and honest good intentions. Both things were true at once. The show was capable of making Apu fully human in certain episodes and also of reducing him to a walking punchline in others. The harm came from the reduction. The defense came from the humanity. And for 30 years, the reduction won, because it was the version that got remembered outside of the episodes themselves and carried into the world on the lips of people using it to bother their classmates. What the show eventually chose to do, step back from the character, change its casting practices, offer an apology, was not nothing. It was also not fast. It was 30 years slow. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section moves from a controversy that built slowly over decades to one that many fans would simply prefer to pretend never happened at all. An episode so deeply unpleasant, so pointlessly cruel, that it holds a unique place in the show's history as the moment the writers drove somewhere they had no good reason to go and left a stain that no amount of later quality could fully wash out. Section 5, Homer vs. Dignity, Season 12, Episode 5. The episode even the fans want to forget. Every long-running show has an episode that its most devoted fans handle with a kind of careful silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from an episode being too emotionally heavy to talk about easily. The other kind. The silence that comes from embarrassment. The silence that comes from not wanting to defend something and not quite wanting to condemn it either. So instead, you just quietly agree to leave it in a corner and not bring it up at parties. Homer vs. Dignity is that episode for The Simpsons. It aired on November 26, 2000, as the 5th episode of Season 12. By this point in the show's run, the golden era was several years behind it. The period that fans and critics generally consider the show at its very best, roughly seasons 3 through 8, with seasons 9 and 10 representing a transition, had given way to something looser, louder, and less careful. The show was still capable of good episodes in season 12, but it was also capable of Homer vs. Dignity, which is a different thing entirely. The episode begins with a premise that had worked well before. The Simpson family is in financial trouble, which is a reliable engine for Simpson stories because it puts Homer under pressure, and pressure on Homer produces action. He goes to Mr. Burns and asks for a raise. Burns, who is always looking for ways to entertain himself at other people's expense, has a different offer. Rather than give Homer more money, Burns will pay Homer to act as his personal jester, someone Burns can send out into the world to perform humiliating tasks for his amusement. Homer agrees. He needs the money badly enough that the humiliation feels worth it. This setup is not inherently wrong. The show had used Homer's dignity as a resource before, spending it for comedy and occasionally making a point about what desperation does to a person. What made those earlier episodes work was that the humiliation had a shape to it. It was absurd in specific, crafted ways. It said something. Even when Homer was being embarrassed, the writers seemed to understand why they were embarrassing him and what the embarrassment was in service of. Homer vs. Dignity does not have that understanding. What it has instead is a willingness to go further than previous episodes in the same direction, without any clear sense of what further was supposed to mean or accomplish. The escalation of tasks Burns sends Homer on starts at humiliating and moves quickly towards something the episode treats as equally humiliating, but is actually a completely different category of thing. Homer is sent to a fancy restaurant to behave badly in public. Homer is sent to do other degrading tasks that draw laughs from Burns and increasingly uncomfortable reactions from everyone watching. And then Homer is sent to the Springfield Zoo, dressed in a panda costume. The idea is that Homer, dressed as a panda, will sneak into the panda enclosure and cause some kind of chaos that Burns finds amusing. What actually happens is that a real male panda in the enclosure becomes interested in Homer and drags him off. The episode makes clear what the panda intends to do. It does not show it explicitly, but it leaves no room for misunderstanding. Homer is dragged away by the panda. The scene cuts away. The implication is present and unmistakable. This is played as a joke. The episode moves on. No character in the episode responds to what happened as though it were serious. Burns is amused. Homer, when he reappears, is simply disheveled and unhappy in the way he is disheveled and unhappy after any other bad day. The show treats what happened to Homer in the panda enclosure with the same comedic weight it would give to Homer slipping on a banana peel or getting stung by bees. That treatment is the problem. Not the scene existing, the treatment. The Simpsons had used Homer's physical suffering as comedy hundreds of times by season 12. Homer getting hurt, Homer being chased, Homer trapped in situations beyond his control. All of that was completely standard. The show had built much of its comedic identity around putting Homer through increasingly unreasonable experiences and watching him absorb them with his particular brand of dumb resilience. That was a valid comedic framework, and the show used it brilliantly in its best years. But what happens in the panda enclosure is not Homer getting hurt. It is Homer being sexually assaulted. And the show, in 2000, made the decision to treat that the same way it would treat Homer getting hurt. The logic seemed to be that if Homer being physically abused is funny, Homer being sexually violated is just a more extreme version of the same thing, and extreme versions of funny things are funnier. That logic is wrong. It was wrong in 2000, and it is not harder to see now. It is just more openly discussed. Sexual assault is not a more extreme version of physical comedy. It is a different category of thing entirely. Treating it as an escalation of slapstick does not make it darker or edgier or more surprising. It makes it something that the show should not have done, for reasons that have nothing to do with being overly sensitive and everything to do with the basic responsibility of what you point your comedy at. The earlier drafts of this episode, which the production team discussed in DVD commentary, made the scene even worse. In the original version, the substance that Homer was eventually going to be instructed to throw on orphans, as part of Burns's cruelest planned prank, was pig's blood rather than fish guts. And in that version, Homer was going to go through with throwing it. The fact that the finished episode has Homer refuse at the last moment, with Burns simply doing it himself, was presented as Homer finding his limit and standing up for himself. It is supposed to be his moment of dignity returning. He will humiliate himself for money, but he will not throw pig's blood on orphans. That is where Homer Simpson draws the line. The problem is that by the time the show gets to that moment, the line Homer refuses to cross feels completely disconnected from the line the show already crossed in the panda enclosure. The episode wants Homer's refusal to throw things at orphans to feel like a moral recovery, a moment where he remembers who he is. But the audience has already watched something significantly worse happen to Homer and been asked to laugh at it. The moral recovery does not land because the moral framework of the episode collapsed earlier and was never rebuilt. It is worth being specific about where this episode sits in the show's timeline, because the timeline matters. By season 12, the character of Mr. Burns had shifted. In the golden era, Burns was monstrous in ways that were funny because they were so extreme they became absurd. He tried to block out the sun. He did not know what a chicken was. His evil was the evil of someone so disconnected from normal human experience that he operated in his own comedic universe. That version of Burns could do terrible things, and the show could hold it as comedy because the terribleness was built from the stuff of cartoons. Grand, impossible, ridiculous. The Burns of Homer vs. Dignity is doing something different. He is not blocking out the sun. He is arranging for a real act of sexual violence against a person in his employ and watching it happen for his amusement. That is not absurdist cartoon evil. That is something that happens in the real world, that causes real harm to real people, and that the show is treating as a punchline. The character had moved from being funny evil to being something the comedy could not actually contain. The fan response to this episode has been consistent across the decades since it aired. It regularly appears on lists of the worst Simpsons episodes ever made. It is not there because it failed at being funny, though it does fail at being funny in large sections. It is there because it succeeded at being something the show should not have been. There is a difference between an episode that tries to do something good and falls short, and an episode that does something it should not have tried to do and lands it exactly as intended. Homer vs. Dignity is the second kind. Ranker, the website that aggregates fan rankings across a huge number of topics, has consistently placed Homer vs. Dignity at or near the top of its worst Simpsons episodes lists based on reader votes. This is not critics applying a theoretical framework to the episode. This is the people who love The Simpsons most, the people who have seen every episode multiple times, consistently identifying this particular episode as the one they wish had not been made. There is a version of this episode that could have worked. The premise, Homer selling his dignity to Mr. Burns piece by piece until he reaches a task he cannot complete, is genuinely strong material. The show had used Burns as an instrument of Homer's humiliation before, and found something real in that dynamic. A well-written version of this episode could have been a sharp look at what people do when they are desperate for money, what pride is worth, and when it stops being worth anything, and where a person finds the line they will not cross, even when every other line has been erased. Those are interesting questions. Homer versus Dignity raises all of them, and then abandons them in the panda enclosure. What the episode reveals more than anything else about its specific content is what happens to a comedy show when it starts mistaking shock for craft. Shock can be a tool. The best Simpsons episodes use shock all the time. Moments that surprised you, went somewhere unexpected, pushed into territory that made you uncertain for a second before the episode resolved the uncertainty into something that made sense. But shock only works as a tool when there is something being built with it. When shock is the point, when the episode's goal is simply to go further than the last episode went, you get Homer versus Dignity. You get a scene the writers thought would be funny because it was more extreme than what came before, with no consideration of what extremity means or what it costs. The show never directly acknowledged this episode as a mistake. It did not revisit it, did not reference it, did not build on what it did or walk back from what it did. It simply existed, and the show moved on. Later seasons would do things that were also widely criticized, but Homer vs. Dignity holds a particular place because of when it happened, early enough in the decline of the show's quality that some viewers point to it as a moment that told them something important had changed, that the writers were now willing to do things the earlier writers would not have done, and not because the earlier writers lacked the courage. The courage argument is the one that comes up occasionally in defensive episodes like this one. The idea that darker, more extreme content represents the writers being braver, pushing further, taking risks that safe writers would not take. That argument collapses quickly when you apply it to Homer versus Dignity. Courage in comedy means saying something true in a way that makes people uncomfortable because the truth is uncomfortable. What happened in the panda enclosure was not brave, it was the opposite of brave. It was the easiest possible move, taking something terrible, pointing a laugh track at it, and calling the discomfort it produces a comedic achievement. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The episode that comes next in this essay took its offense in a completely different direction. It was not dark in this way. It was not cruel in this way. It was offensive in the oldest and simplest way a comedy show can be offensive, by visiting a real place, treating its people and culture as raw material for jokes, and discovering that the people in that real place did not find themselves as funny as the writers did. And unlike Homer vs. Dignity, which offended fans of the show itself, the next episode managed to offend an entire country. Section 6. 30 Minutes Over Tokyo. Season 10, Episode 23. The Japan episode they'll never forgive. There is a recurring pattern in The Simpsons that the show's own writers acknowledged openly. Whenever the Simpson family traveled to another country, that country got upset. Writer and producer Mike Reiss said it himself in an interview. Whenever the Simpsons visit another country, that country gets furious. He said it without much apology, more as an observation about the show's track record than as a confession of wrongdoing. The show had already managed to anger Australia. It had already caused problems with Brazil. It had already made jokes about countries and cultures that those countries and cultures did not appreciate. But of all the international controversies the show produced across its run, the Japan episode stands apart. Not because the reaction was the loudest, though the reaction was significant. Because the episode was banned in Japan permanently, is still not available on Disney Plus in Japan to this day, and contains a specific moment involving the Japanese emperor that crossed a line so clear that even the show's most dedicated defenders struggled to explain it away. The episode is called 30 Minutes Over Tokyo. It aired on May 16, 1999, as the 23rd episode of Season 10. The title is a reference to a World War II film called 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, which was about an American bombing raid on Japan during the war. That choice of reference, for an episode that would go on to deeply offend Japan, was not an accident. It set a tone before the episode even started. The story begins with the Simpson family losing all their money to an internet scammer. They find a collection of extremely cheap airline tickets and use them to travel to Tokyo. The tickets are so cheap that the flight itself is a misery. The seats are tiny, the conditions are terrible. The whole experience is played as a joke about budget travel taken to its most extreme conclusion. Once they arrive in Japan, the episode becomes a rapid-fire sequence of jokes about Japanese culture. Some of these jokes work as gentle observations. The show notes the difference between American food portions and Japanese food portions. It plays with the cultural gap between how Homer and Bart approach things and how the Japanese people around them respond. Some of this is the kind of broad cultural comedy that travel episodes have always used, and in small doses it is not inherently offensive. But the episode does not stay in small doses. It accelerates. The family attends a sumo wrestling match. This is where the episode makes its most significant mistake. At the match, Homer spots the Japanese emperor, the real emperor of Japan, depicted in the show as Emperor Akihito, who was the actual emperor of Japan at the time the episode aired. Homer, being Homer, does not understand or care about who this person is. He grabs the emperor, spins him around, and throws him into a large bin full of sumo thongs. This is not a subtle background gag. It is the centerpiece of the sumo sequence. The show puts it front and center, plays it as a big comedic moment, and moves on as though throwing the living emperor of Japan into a pile of wrestling underwear is the kind of thing that happens in a comedy and then gets forgotten. In Japan, the emperor is not simply a political figure or a celebrity. The emperor holds a place in Japanese culture and national identity that is genuinely difficult to explain in Western terms. The emperor is not the prime minister, who actually runs the government. The emperor is a symbol of the nation, of its history, of its continuity. Treating the emperor with deep respect is not just a political courtesy in Japan. It is something closer to a cultural foundation. Depicting the emperor being physically grabbed by a foreign cartoon character and thrown into a bin of soiled athletic clothing was not read in Japan as harmless silliness. It was read as a profound act of disrespect towards something that the country holds sacred. The episode was never broadcast in Japan. It is still not available on Disney Plus in that country. It was also initially banned in South Korea, though for a different reason. South Korea has a long and painful history with Japan, stemming from the years when Japan occupied Korea. And the episode's treatment of Japanese culture, including its depictions of Japanese media and popular figures, was felt to be something South Korean audiences should not be asked to engage with in a comedic context. South Korea eventually allowed the episode to air in 2007 after years of it being unavailable. The emperor moment is the most discussed part of the episode, but it is not the only thing that got it banned. The episode also contains a scene that parodies a Japanese anime cartoon. In the parody, the animated characters on screen cause the children watching them to have seizures. This was a direct reference to a real event that had happened in Japan in December 1997, less than 2 years before this episode aired. A Pokemon episode called Electric Soldier Porygon contained flashing light sequences that triggered seizures in hundreds of Japanese children who were watching it. The incident sent approximately 685 children to hospitals across Japan. It was a national news story. It was traumatic for the families involved. It led to major changes in how Japanese television handled animation. The Simpsons made a joke about it less than 18 months later. From the perspective of the American writers, this may have seemed like fair game, a reference to a strange and widely reported international news story that had already become something of a cultural curiosity outside Japan. From the perspective of Japanese viewers, it was a joke about hundreds of their children being hospitalized. Those are two very different ways of seeing the same reference. The episode also contains a sequence in which the family appears on a Japanese game show called the Happy Smile Super Challenge Family Wish Show. This is a parody of a genre of Japanese game shows that were popular in the late 1990s and were known in the West partly because of how extreme their challenges appeared to outside viewers. Shows in this style involved contestants being put through genuinely uncomfortable and sometimes painful experiences in the name of entertainment, and they had become a source of fascination and humor for Western audiences who found the format bizarre. The parody in the Simpsons episode takes this concept and pushes it significantly further. Homer is blasted in the face with a flamethrower. He is beaten by members of his own family, who are instructed to hit him as hard as they can as part of the game show format. He is strapped to a tower and repeatedly struck by lightning. The show plays all of this as both a parody of Japanese game shows and as a vehicle for Homer's standard physical suffering, which had always been a reliable comedic source. The specific problem with the game show sequence is not that it parodies Japanese game shows. Parody is a legitimate comedic form. The problem is what happens when the parody is the only image of something that a large audience has access to. Japanese game shows, as they actually existed, were not simply torture chambers. They were a particular kind of entertainment with their own logic and appeal. Reducing them to a sequence in which a foreign visitor is set on fire and electrocuted flattens an entire media tradition into a single image. Japan is a place where they hurt people and think it is funny. That image, repeated across American popular culture in this period, did real work in shaping how American audiences thought about Japan. There is also a moment involving Hello Kitty merchandise. The episode suggests, through a throwaway gag, that Hello Kitty products are made by burning cats alive. Hello Kitty was at this point one of the most widely recognized cultural exports Japan had produced. The gag is quick and is clearly not meant to be taken literally. But for Japanese viewers, seeing their most globally beloved cultural creation referenced in connection with animal cruelty was another layer of the episode treating Japanese culture as a collection of raw materials to make jokes from, without any particular concern for what those jokes communicated about Japan to the millions of Americans watching. The episode ends with the family trying to get home. They have spent all their remaining money during their time in Japan. Homer attempts to make an origami crane out of their last $1,000,000 note as a gesture for Lisa, but it blows away. Desperate to earn enough money for tickets home, the family signs up for the game show. After surviving the game show's challenges, they win enough money to get home. The final shot has the family flying away from Japan, with Homer making clear he never wants to return. That final note, Japan as a place Homer cannot wait to escape, is worth noting. The episode does not end with any warmth toward the country. It does not find anything in Japan that Homer values or wants to bring home. The country is purely a source of difficulty and strangeness from which the family is relieved to escape. The Australia episode, which had also offended an entire country, at least contained some genuine admiration for the landscape, and a few Australian characters who were portrayed with something approaching humanity. 30 Minutes Over Tokyo offers Japan almost none of that. The country is a backdrop for punishment. None of this means the episode has nothing in it that works. Some of the culture gap comedy lands. The cheap airline sequence at the beginning is genuinely funny in the show's classic tradition of taking a real phenomenon, bargain travel, and pushing it to its most extreme logical conclusion. The show had always been good at that kind of exaggeration, and some of that skill is visible here, even inside an episode that goes badly wrong in other places. But the parts that work do not cancel out what the episode did with the Emperor, the seizure reference, and its general posture toward Japan as a collection of punchlines rather than a real place with real people in it. Those elements are not small parts of the episode. They are the moments the episode was building toward and was most pleased with. The show's track record with travel episodes, Australia, Brazil, Japan, China, tells a consistent story. The writers understood how to find comedy in the gap between American assumptions and the reality of other cultures. What they were less consistently good at was remembering that the people on the other side of that gap were not simply supporting characters in an American comedy. They were real communities watching their country be reduced to a set of jokes by a show with no particular investment in getting them right. Japan drew the hardest line. The Emperor moment was the clearest case in the show's international history of a comedic choice that had no defense beyond the writers wanting a big laugh and not thinking carefully enough about what they were reaching for. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What comes next in this essay stays in the territory of countries the show managed to offend. But the next case is more complicated than Japan, because the next country did not just complain, it almost went to court. Section 7. Blame It on Lisa. Season 13, E15. The episode Brazil almost sued over. There is a moment in the history of The Simpsons where a sovereign nation's tourism board sat down and seriously considered taking an American cartoon to court. Not writing a strongly worded letter, not issuing a public statement of disappointment, actually pursuing legal action against a television show for the damage it had done to the reputation of one of the most famous cities on Earth. That moment happened in 2002, and the city was Rio de Janeiro, and the episode that caused it was Blame It on Lisa. To understand why Brazil reacted the way it did, you have to understand what Rio de Janeiro meant as a global image in 2002. The city was one of the most photographed and celebrated places in the world. Its beaches, its mountains, its carnival, its culture, these were things Brazil actively promoted to attract tourists and investment. The city's identity was built in significant part on the image it projected to the outside world. Tourism was not a small side business for Rio. It was a central part of how the city functioned economically. The Rio de Janeiro Tourism Board was not a minor local committee. It was a serious organization with real money and real stakes invested in controlling the story the world told about their city. Then The Simpsons came to town. The episode aired on March 31st, 2002 as the 15th episode of Season 13. The premise is built around Lisa, who has been sponsoring a Brazilian orphan through a charity program. The orphan, a boy named Ronaldo, has stopped communicating with her, and Lisa is worried. She convinces the family to travel to Brazil to find out what happened to him. This gives the writers a reason to send the family to Rio de Janeiro, which gives them access to a city they had apparently decided was full of comedic potential. The episode does not ease into its depiction of Rio. It arrives with both feet. The city is shown as a place of near constant danger and chaos. Kidnapping is presented as practically a standard feature of daily life there. Homer is grabbed by kidnappers within a very short time of the family arriving. This is not a background detail or a single joke. It is a major plot point that drives the second half of the episode. Homer is taken, and the family has to scramble to come up with ransom money while also trying to find Lisa's missing orphan. The streets of Rio in the episode are shown as overrun with rats. The slums are depicted as brightly painted to trick tourists into thinking they are safe, when they are not. The episode specifically makes this joke, that the colors are a deliberate distraction designed to fool outsiders. There are dangerous wild animals loose in the city. There are references to various criminal activities presented as simply part of the texture of life in Rio. The overall picture the episode paints of the city is of a beautiful-looking place that is, beneath its surface, chaotic, criminal, and deeply unsafe. The show also made jokes about Brazilian culture more broadly that did not land well. There were gags about Brazilian men that played on stereotypes about their behavior and sexuality. The telenovela genre, the dramatic soap opera format that is enormously popular across Brazil and Latin America and represents a genuine and beloved art form with a long creative history, is depicted in the episode as absurd and ridiculous, played purely for laughs without any acknowledgement of what the genre actually means to the people who make it and watch it. Brazilian viewers did not respond well. Brazilian media covered the episode extensively, and the reaction was largely one of genuine offense. People felt that their city and their country had been used as a backdrop for jokes built on the worst possible assumptions about what life in Brazil was like. The kidnapping plotline was particularly stinging. Kidnapping does occur in Brazil, as it does in many countries, but making it the central comedic premise of an episode set in Rio, essentially turning a real and serious crime problem that affects real Brazilian families into a punchline, felt to many Brazilian viewers like the show was taking their suffering and turning it into entertainment for American audiences. The Rio de Janeiro Tourism Board moved quickly. They announced that they were considering legal action against the show's producers for damaging the reputation of the city. This was not a vague threat or an emotional response. The tourism board was making a specific legal argument that the episode had caused measurable harm to Rio's image as a destination and that the producers should be held accountable for that harm. They were prepared to pursue this through the courts if necessary. The threat of a lawsuit got the attention of the show's producers in a way that a strongly worded statement might not have. Producer James L. Brooks issued a public apology on behalf of the show. Brooks was a significant figure, not a junior staff member, but one of the most important producers in the show's history, a person whose name carried real weight. The apology acknowledged that the episode had caused offense and expressed regret for that. The lawsuit never happened. After the apology, the tourism board stepped back from legal action. The situation was considered resolved, at least officially. To demonstrate that the resolution was genuine and not simply a way of making the legal threat go away, the show eventually brought the Simpson family back to Brazil in a later episode. The return trip was designed to show Brazil in a more positive light, to offer something closer to a balanced picture. It aired without controversy. No lawsuits, no government complaints, no tourism boards issuing statements. The matter, at least in its most formal sense, was closed. But the episode itself remained. Blame It on Lisa is still there. You can still watch it. The rats are still in the streets of the cartoon version of Rio. Homer is still getting kidnapped within minutes of landing. The telenovelas are still being laughed at. The apology and the return trip did not edit the original episode. They addressed the situation around the episode without changing what the episode actually was. It is worth comparing what happened with Brazil to what had happened 7 years earlier with Australia, because the pattern is revealing. The Australia episode, called Bart vs. Australia, aired in 1995 during Season 6. It is a better episode than Blame It on Lisa by most measures, funnier, more carefully constructed, with sharper jokes and more affection mixed in with its mockery. But it also offended Australia significantly enough that the Australian Parliament formally condemned it. Writer Mike Reiss later said that when he went to Australia on a promotional tour for the show, he had to defend the episode repeatedly to Australian journalists and viewers who felt their country had been misrepresented and mocked. The specific grievances in the Australian case were different from Brazil's. Australia objected to the depiction of their accent, their culture, their legal system, and a particular plot point involving a mandatory punishment that was deeply undignified and that Australian viewers found insulting. The government's formal condemnation of the episode was unusual. It is not common for a parliamentary body to officially respond to an animated American television show, and it signaled how seriously the country took the episode's mockery. Both cases, Australia and Brazil, follow the same basic structure. The Simpsons sends the family to a real country. The writers use that country as a collection of raw material for jokes. The jokes rely on the worst or most extreme versions of existing stereotypes about that country. The people who actually live in that country watch the episode and feel that their home has been reduced to a punchline. The producers receive the complaint and respond with varying levels of acknowledgement. What is different about the Brazil case is the legal dimension. Australia complained loudly and officially, but it did not threaten to sue. Brazil got close enough to actual legal action that a senior producer issued a formal apology. That escalation tells you something about the degree of offense and about how seriously the tourism board believed the episode had caused real damage to the city's reputation. There is also a detail in the Brazil episode that is worth examining separately from the big set-piece moments. The episode uses a Portuguese-speaking character whose dialogue is subtitled in English. Some of the things this character says in Portuguese do not match what the subtitles claim he is saying. This was noted by Brazilian viewers who actually spoke Portuguese and understood the disconnect. Whether this was a deliberate joke at the expense of Brazilian viewers, or simply a careless mistake by writers who did not speak the language, the effect was the same. It suggested that the people making the episode had not invested enough care in getting the most basic details right. That carelessness, if that is what it was, runs through the episode's broader approach to Rio. The city's actual complexity, its genuine beauty, its rich cultural life, the real human beings who live there, none of these things are visible in the episode. What is visible is a checklist of the things that an American audience might already fear or assume about a South American city. Crime, kidnapping, rats, poverty dressed up in bright colors. The episode did not discover these things, it arrived with them already packed and then arranged the story around them. The Simpsons has always used the real world as material. That is not a flaw, it is the show's fundamental approach. Springfield is a cartoon version of an American town that contains real American concerns, real American anxieties, real American contradictions. That approach produces brilliant television when it is applied with care and intelligence. It produces something else when it is applied to a real city in a real country and the care and intelligence are replaced by assumptions. Brazil got the something else version. Mike Reiss's observation that every country The Simpsons visits gets furious was offered as a funny observation about the show's track record. Listened to carefully, it is actually a description of a consistent failure. The show kept going to real places and kept getting those places wrong, and the people who lived in those places kept being upset, and the show kept noting the pattern without substantially changing its approach. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next episode in this essay took its controversy somewhere completely different from international offense. No countries were upset. No tourism boards threatened legal action. Instead, the controversy was political and domestic, and it split American viewers along lines that the show had always been careful to avoid, until it stopped being careful. Section 8. There's Something About Marrying. S16, E10. Gay marriage, Patty coming out, and the conservatives' response. There are episodes that become controversial because they go somewhere dark. There are episodes that become controversial because they offend a specific group of people who feel targeted by a joke. And then there are episodes that become controversial simply because they took a position on something the country was actively fighting about, and taking any position at all in that climate was enough to set off a reaction from one side or the other. There's Something About Marrying is that third kind. It aired on February 20th, 2005, as the 10th episode of Season 16. By the time it aired, the debate over same-sex marriage in the United States had reached a level of intensity that made it almost impossible to touch without immediately becoming part of the argument. The show touched it anyway. To understand the timing, you have to understand what was happening in America in 2004 and early 2005. In February 2004, the city of San Francisco began issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. This was a significant moment, not because it immediately changed the law across the country, but because it made the debate real and visible in a way that it had not been before. These were not theoretical marriages being discussed in courtrooms. These were actual couples standing in actual city halls, getting actual licenses. The images were everywhere. The reaction, from supporters and opponents alike, was immediate and intense. The Simpsons writers began working on the episode in March 2004, directly inspired by what was happening in San Francisco. Executive producer Al Jean said publicly at the time that the show was interested in exploring the various positions different characters would take on the issue, and that the show itself was not going to come down firmly on one side. He described the approach as exploring everybody's different views rather than pushing a single argument. That is a fair description of what the episode attempts to do. The plot works like this. Lisa comes up with an idea to bring tourists and money into Springfield by having the town legalize same-sex marriage. Mayor Quimby, who is interested primarily in the money this would bring in, agrees. Homer discovers that ministers conducting marriages are paid $200 per couple, immediately abandons whatever personal feelings he might have about the issue, and gets himself ordained as a minister through an online church so he can start collecting fees. He proceeds to marry every same-sex couple who comes to Springfield seeking a legal ceremony. Meanwhile, at the Simpson home, Patty Bouvier, Marge's sister, who has been a recurring character since the show's first season, comes out to the family as a lesbian. She tells them she is in love with a professional golfer named Veronica and asks Homer, as the family's newly ordained minister, to marry them. Homer immediately accepts and has no problem with Patty's sexuality. Marge, however, does. She is uncomfortable, upset, and finds herself unable to fully support her sister's relationship. The episode gives Marge time to work through this discomfort before eventually coming around and accepting Patty for who she is. Reverend Lovejoy, the town's Protestant minister, refuses to perform any same-sex marriages, citing the Bible's teachings. This is presented as his genuine belief rather than as pure bigotry. The episode gives his position a real basis rather than making him simply a villain. The show had previously given hints about Patty's sexuality. In a season 13 episode called Jaws Wired Shut, Patty is heard but not seen on a Springfield Gay Pride parade float described as the staying in the closet float. The groundwork was there, quietly laid, waiting for the show to decide when to use it. Creator Matt Groening said at the time that the decision to out Patty had been building for a while, and that keeping her as a love-starved, single woman forever had started to feel outdated. The character had been portrayed for years as someone who had never found romantic happiness, and giving her a genuine love story felt like a way of doing something real with a character who had been a supporting figure for over 15 years. The decision was announced months before the episode aired, in the summer of 2004, when Al Jean revealed at San Diego Comic-Con that a longtime character would come out during the upcoming season. He did not say who. This created significant media coverage and public speculation. Various characters were guessed. When the episode finally aired and Patty was revealed as the character, the reaction was split along lines that reflected the country's broader division on the issue. Conservative groups reacted quickly and loudly. L. Brent Bozell III, who was the president of the Parents Television Council, a group that had been a consistent critic of what it considered inappropriate content on television, made a statement that became one of the most quoted reactions to the episode. He said that the show was watched by millions of children and asked whether children needed to have gay marriage pushed at them as an issue and why the show could not simply entertain them. This reaction was entirely predictable given the climate. The Parents Television Council had objected to Simpsons content before and would object to it again. Their position was consistent. They believed the show had a responsibility to its young viewers that it was not honoring by engaging with controversial social topics. What made the episode's conservative reception more complicated was the specific plot point involving Veronica. Partway through the episode, it is revealed that Veronica is not a woman. Homer discovers, during a golf game, that Veronica is a man living as a woman. This revelation is played as a comedic twist. Marge dramatically pulls away the choker Veronica wears around her neck and reveals a prominent Adam's apple, which she presents as proof that Veronica is not who Patty believed her to be. Veronica is disqualified from the women's golf tour because of this. Patty's wedding does not happen. In 2005, many viewers read this as a simple plot twist with a funny reveal. By 2025, the same moment reads very differently. Critics and viewers returning to the episode in more recent years have noted that the trans reveal, the moment where a character's gender identity is exposed against their will as a shocking comedic punchline, is a format that carries real-world weight. In reality, moments where a transgender person's identity is revealed without their consent are frequently followed by violence. The episode plays that moment for laughs and moves on. One critic at the time wrote directly that when Marge dramatically pulled away Veronica's choker, it may have seemed funny in the room, but in real life, such revelations are often followed by terrible violence, and it is no joke. This was not the dominant reading of the moment in 2005, but it is impossible to ignore now, and it represents a case similar in structure to Homer Badman, an episode that was doing something its writers understood as progressive, or at least as neutral territory, containing a moment that looks significantly more complicated through a later lens. What the episode was genuinely trying to do on the question of same-sex marriage is worth crediting. The show gave Patty a real coming-out story with emotional stakes. It showed Marge's discomfort without making Marge a villain. It showed her working through something difficult rather than simply rejecting her sister. It gave Patty a genuine desire for love and partnership that the show had never really given her before. These were real creative choices that treated the subject with more care than many shows were willing to give it in 2005. Al Jean's description of the episode as exploring various positions rather than pushing one was mostly accurate. The show did not tell its audience what to think about same-sex marriage. It showed Homer being enthusiastically in favor because there was money in it. It showed Quimby being in favor because of tourism revenue. It showed Lovejoy being opposed based on religious belief. It showed Marge being uncomfortable for personal family reasons. These are real positions that real people held, and the episode moved through them without declaring a winner. But the episode exists in a specific historical moment, and that moment shapes what it means to watch it. In February 2005, an episode of a major primetime animated show in which a long-running character came out as a lesbian and in which same-sex weddings were performed on screen was a genuinely significant cultural moment. The show was not simply being neutral. By depicting these things at all, by treating them as normal enough to be the subject of a comedy episode, the show was taking a position, not a stated one, but a real one. The position was that same-sex relationships were a legitimate subject for mainstream entertainment, and that a character being gay was something the show could handle as a matter of course. That position, in February 2005, was enough to generate real controversy. The Parents Television Council's objection was not really about the episode's quality or its specific content. It was about the fact that the episode existed. The controversy it generated was a controversy about whether the show should have made it at all. This is different from most of the other controversies in this essay. The Japan episode caused offense because of what the writers put in it. The Apu controversy grew from decades of accumulated harm. The Brazil episode upset people because of how it depicted a real city. But the controversy around There's Something About Marrying was, at its core, a controversy about representation, about whether a mainstream American show had the right to depict gay characters living openly and seeking marriage in the same way straight characters always had. The answer, which seems obvious now, was not obvious to everyone in 2005. The country was in the middle of an active, bitter argument about this question. 11 states had passed constitutional amendments banning same-sex marriage in November 2004, just 3 months before the episode aired. The political and social climate was one in which a cartoon showing gay weddings was a genuine act of engagement with one of the most contested issues in the country. The episode did it anyway, and the reaction it got, loud, split, predictable, and entirely sincere on both sides, tells you more about 2005 than it tells you about the episode. Patty Bouvier is still a lesbian. The show has never walked that back. In the years since, as same-sex marriage became legal across the United States in 2015, the episode has aged in interesting ways. The controversy around it has mostly faded, not because anyone changed their minds about what they believed in 2005, but because the world eventually moved to a place where the episode's central premise, that gay people should be able to get married and that a character being gay is unremarkable, became the settled position of American law. The trans reveal at the end of the episode has not faded. If anything, it has become more visible as the conversation around transgender people and their treatment in media has grown. That specific moment is the part of the episode that carries the most weight when you watch it now, and it is not the part the show was proud of. It was played as a twist, as a comedy beat, as a way of resolving the wedding storyline. It was not designed to be the episode's most examined moment. It became that anyway. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What comes next in this essay takes us from domestic political controversy to international political controversy. An episode that did not just offend a community within America or a country that was upset about its depiction, but an episode that made jokes about one of the most powerful governments in the world and discovered that those jokes had real consequences. Section 9. Goo Goo Gai Pan, S16E12, the China episode that got the show banned nationally. Most of the controversies in this essay involved a specific group of people, a specific community, or a specific country reacting to a specific episode. The reaction was loud, the offense was real, and the show dealt with the consequences in whatever way it chose to deal with them. But in almost every case, the controversy stayed in the realm of complaint. People were upset. They said so. The show acknowledged it or did not. Life continued. The China episode is different. When The Simpsons decided to visit China in 2005, it did not upset a tourism board or anger a parliamentary body or generate strongly worded statements from conservative advocacy groups. It upset the government of the most populated country on Earth. A government with the actual power to remove the show entirely from the lives of more than 1 billion people. And that government used that power. The episode is called Goo Goo Gai Pan. It aired on March 13, 2005, as the 12th episode of season 16. The title is a play on the name of a Chinese-American dish called Moo Goo Gai Pan, which is a chicken and vegetable stir-fry that became popular in Chinese-American restaurants in the United States. The wordplay is fairly gentle by Simpson standards. The episode itself is not. The story begins with Selma Bouvier, Marge's other sister, Patty's twin, who has spent most of the show's run being relentlessly and specifically miserable, receiving news from her doctor that she is going through menopause. The diagnosis hits her hard because Selma has always wanted to be a mother. She has been married multiple times to increasingly unsuitable men, and none of those marriages produce children. Now, as she understands it, her biological options for having a child are closing. The episode takes her desire seriously, which is more than the show always does with Selma, whose unhappiness is usually played purely for comedy. Selma discovers that she can adopt a baby from China. The Chinese adoption program at the time was genuinely active. Many American families had adopted children from China during this period, and it was a real and significant pathway to parenthood for people who could not have biological children or who wanted to build their families through adoption. The show grounds Selma's storyline in something real, which gives the episode an emotional anchor that some of the show's travel episodes lack. The complication is that China's adoption rules at the time required the adopting parent to be married. Selma is very much not married. The family's solution is to have Homer pretend to be Selma's husband for the duration of the trip, with Marge pretending to be the children's nanny rather than Homer's wife. They travel to China together with this fiction in place, trying to maintain it long enough for Selma to complete the adoption process. This setup gives the episode a workable comedic engine. Homer pretending to be someone he is not, in a country he does not understand, for reasons he only partially grasps, while Marge watches from a careful distance. That dynamic had worked well for the show before, and in the hands of a different episode, it might have worked here. But the writers made a series of choices about what to include in the China sequences that made the episode something the Chinese government could not allow to air. The first major choice involves Tiananmen Square. The Simpsons arrive at the famous square in Beijing, which is one of the most recognizable public spaces in the world. In June 1989, Tiananmen Square was the site of a massive protest by Chinese citizens, primarily students, calling for democratic reforms. The Chinese government sent in the military to end the protest. The crackdown resulted in deaths. The exact number has never been officially confirmed by the Chinese government, and estimates vary widely, but it was significant. The event became one of the most discussed and debated moments in modern Chinese history. The Chinese government's official position is that the crackdown was necessary and appropriate. Discussion of the events of June 1989 is heavily restricted inside China. In the episode, the Simpson family walks through Tiananmen Square and passes a large sign. The sign reads, "On this site in 1989, nothing happened." That joke is direct, specific, and unmistakable. It is not a vague reference. It is not something that could be interpreted multiple ways. It is a pointed statement that the Chinese government covered up what actually happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989, written as a sign that the fictional Chinese government in the episode has placed in the square to enforce that cover-up. The joke works by being maximally clear. The humor comes from the gap between the sign's claim and the historical reality, a gap that everyone watching is expected to understand immediately. From the perspective of the American writers, this was political satire in the show's long tradition. The Simpsons had been satirizing powerful institutions and governments since its earliest seasons. Poking fun at politicians, corporations, religious organizations, and authority figures was one of the show's foundational activities. Pointing out that a government had covered up a historical event was the kind of thing the show did regularly. From the perspective of the Chinese government, it was a major American entertainment product making a joke specifically designed to mock their official account of a politically sensitive event, and doing so in a way that would be seen by millions of people around the world. The second major choice involves Mao Zedong. Mao was the leader of China from 1949 until his death in 1976. He is a deeply significant and complicated historical figure. In China, his image and legacy are treated with enormous official reverence. His face appears on Chinese currency. His portrait hangs at the entrance to Tiananmen Square, and official Chinese history credits him with founding the modern Chinese state. At the same time, historians outside China have documented that policies implemented during Mao's rule resulted in millions of deaths, particularly during a period in the late 1950s and early 1960s known as the Great Leap Forward. In the episode, the family visits the mausoleum where Mao's preserved body is on public display. Homer looks at Mao's embalmed body and delivers a line describing him as a little angel who killed 50 million people. This joke, like the Tiananmen sign, is not subtle. It directly references the death toll associated with Mao's policies, a figure that the Chinese government does not acknowledge and that is considered a deeply sensitive topic inside China. Making a joke about it, particularly a joke delivered by the show's most famous fool, treating it as a throwaway observation, was guaranteed to cause a reaction. The Chinese government reacted. The episode was banned from broadcast in China. This was not a complicated regulatory process. The National Radio and Television Administration, which controls what can be broadcast in China, simply did not allow it. The episode was not available to Chinese viewers. But the government went further. In 2006, China announced a ban on foreign cartoons being broadcast on television between the hours of 5 in the afternoon and 9 in the evening. This was the window of time when children were most likely to be watching television. The policy effectively removed foreign animated shows from the most watched television hours in the country during that time period. The Simpsons was not the only show affected. The policy applied to all foreign cartoons during those hours. But the timing of the policy, coming shortly after the Goo Goo Gai Pan episode had caused controversy, was noted by media observers at the time. The episode is also not available on Disney Plus in Hong Kong. This is significant because Hong Kong, while part of China, has historically had different rules about media access than mainland China. The fact that the episode is unavailable there as well suggests that the sensitivity around its content extends beyond just the mainland government's direct authority. It is worth pausing on what makes this episode different from the Japan controversy and the Brazil controversy. In those cases, the offense was cultural. The show had mocked a country's traditions, depicted its cities as dangerous, or disrespected a significant national figure. The reactions came from the public, from tourism boards, from parliamentary bodies expressing outrage. These were real and significant reactions, but they operated within the normal range of how countries respond when they feel they have been unfairly portrayed by foreign media. In the China case, the offense was explicitly political. The jokes that caused the episode to be banned were not jokes about Chinese food or Chinese accents or Chinese customs. They were jokes about a specific historical event that the Chinese government has spent decades trying to control the narrative around, and about a political leader whose legacy the government officially protects from criticism. The show was not being culturally insensitive in the way it had been with Japan or Brazil. It was directly engaging with the political history of one of the world's most powerful governments, and doing so in a way that challenged that government's official story. That is a different kind of thing, and the response was a different kind of response. It is also worth being clear about what the episode contains beyond the political jokes. Selma's story, her grief over her biological options closing, her genuine desire to be a mother, the emotional weight she brings to the adoption process, is handled with more care than the show often gives secondary characters. When she finally holds the baby she has adopted, the moment is played straight rather than for laughs. The show allows Selma to have something real and good happen to her, which is rarer than it should be given how consistently the show uses her unhappiness as a source of easy comedy. That emotional core does not change what the political jokes did or why the episode was banned. But it is part of the truth of the episode, and leaving it out would give a false picture. Goo Goo Gai Pan is not a mean episode at its heart. It is an episode that contains some genuinely kind intentions alongside some extremely provocative political choices. And the provocative political choices were the ones that mattered to the Chinese government. The show did not apologize for this episode the way it apologized for the Brazil episode. No senior producer issued a public statement of regret. No return trip to China was planned to make things right. The political jokes stand as they were written, and the episode remains unavailable in China. There is something almost clarifying about this. The Simpsons has spent much of its history making fun of powerful institutions, governments, corporations, religions, media organizations, and occasionally facing consequences for doing so. The China episode faced the most direct and sweeping consequence the show had ever encountered for that kind of satire. The Chinese government did not argue, did not complain, did not request changes. It simply closed the door. An entire country, containing more than 1 billion people, was separated from the episode by a government that had the power to make that decision and exercised it without hesitation. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What comes next in this essay is a controversy that has nothing to do with foreign governments or international offense. It is entirely domestic, entirely internal, and in some ways the most revealing controversy of all, because it did not come from outside the show's audience. It came from the audience itself, from the fans who had given 30 years of their loyalty to a character they trusted, and who felt that trust broken in a single episode. Section 10. The Principal and the Pauper, Season 9, Episode 2, the episode that broke the fandom. Every controversy in this essay so far has involved the show offending someone outside of its core audience, a government, a country, a community, a group of people who looked at what the show did and felt harmed or disrespected by it. Those controversies matter. They reveal real things about how the show thought about the world and about the people it was willing to use as material. But there is another category of offense that is harder to define and in some ways cuts deeper. It is the offense that comes not from a joke that targets someone, not from a political choice that upsets a government, not from a caricature that follows real people into their real lives. It is the offense that comes from a show breaking faith with the people who love it most. From a show taking something its audience trusted completely and treating that trust as though it did not matter. The Principal and the Pauper is that kind of episode. And of all the controversies covered in this essay, it is the one that produced the most sustained, most consistent, most unified negative response from the show's own devoted audience, a response that has not softened in the nearly 30 years since the episode aired. The episode aired on September 28, 1997. It was the second episode of Season 9, airing just 1 week after The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson, which we covered earlier. It was written by Ken Keeler, who was a talented writer with genuine credits to his name. It was directed by Stephen Dean Moore. By every external measure, it was a normal production from a normal season of television. Nothing about how it was made suggests that anyone in the room knew they were about to cause the most sustained fan backlash the show had ever produced. The setup involves a celebration for Principal Seymour Skinner. The town of Springfield is gathering to honor Skinner for his 25th year as principal of Springfield Elementary. It is a warm occasion. People are gathered together. Skinner is being celebrated. And then, in the middle of the celebration, a stranger arrives. The stranger is a man named Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner. He explains that the man Springfield has known as their principal for 25 years is actually not Seymour Skinner at all. The man they know is an orphan named Armin Tamzarian, who served in the military alongside the real Seymour Skinner in Vietnam. Tamzarian believed Skinner had been killed in action. He made his way to Springfield, found Skinner's mother Agnes, and, for reasons the episode explains as a combination of guilt, grief, and the desire to give Agnes some comfort, began living as Seymour Skinner. He took the name. He took the identity. He built an entire life around being a person he was not. The real Skinner, it turns out, is alive. He was not killed. He eventually made his way back, and now he is standing in Springfield, claiming his name and his life back. This is the premise, and on paper it is not obviously wrong. Identity, the question of who a person really is versus who they claim to be, the gap between the life someone was born into and the life they built for themselves, these are rich themes. A show as smart as The Simpsons at its best could theoretically do something interesting with a premise like this. There is a real story available in the idea of a man who spent 25 years living as someone else, and the question of what that means for who he actually is. The episode does not pursue that story. What it does instead is something that the show's audience found genuinely unforgivable. The real Seymour Skinner is portrayed as a difficult, unpleasant, arrogant man. Springfield does not like him. Agnes, Skinner's mother, or rather the woman who had been living as Skinner's mother for 25 years, decides she prefers the fake Skinner to the real one. The town collectively decides the same thing. They do not want the real Seymour Skinner. They want Armin Tamzarian, who they have known for 25 years as the only Skinner they ever cared about. The resolution of the episode is that the town physically puts the real Seymour Skinner on a train and sends him away. A judge then issues a legal order, played as a joke, declaring that the name Armin Tamzarian shall never be spoken again in Springfield, and that the man who had been living as Skinner shall legally and permanently be recognized as Seymour Skinner going forward. The episode ends with everything back the way it was, Tamzarian restored to his position as principal, the real Skinner erased from the town's story, and the show simply moves on. The next episode treats Skinner as Skinner. Future seasons treat Skinner as Skinner. The events of The Principal and the Pauper are acknowledged occasionally and then pushed aside. Later showrunners and writers have treated the episode as something close to non-canon, meaning they behave, when making new episodes, as if it largely did not happen. The audience reaction was unlike anything the show had produced before. Fans were not just disappointed, they were genuinely angry in a way that felt personal. Letters were written. Critics who had defended the show through various controversies came out against this one. Even people who worked on the show were not quiet about their feelings. Harry Shearer, the voice actor who plays Principal Skinner, as well as Mr. Burns, Ned Flanders, Kent Brockman, Dr. Hibbert, and numerous other characters, was openly unhappy. Shearer has never been a quiet or diplomatic public figure when it comes to the show, and his reaction to The Principal and the Pauper was no exception. He made clear that he found the episode a mistake. He felt it had taken a character he had voiced and developed for nearly a decade and casually dismantled the foundation that character was built on. To understand why the audience reacted so strongly, you have to understand what Principal Skinner meant to the show and to the people who had been watching it. Skinner is not a main character. He is not Homer or Marge or Bart or Lisa. He is a supporting character, someone who appears regularly, who has a defined relationship with the main family, who exists in a specific role within Springfield's world. But over 8 seasons, the show had built him into something fully realized. Skinner had a history. He had fought in Vietnam and carried that experience with him. He had a complicated, suffocating relationship with his mother Agnes. He had genuine ambitions that the smallness of his life kept frustrating. He had a long, quietly painful, almost romance with teacher Edna Krabappel. He had dignity, even when the show was making his life difficult. He was a person. All of that, the Vietnam history, the relationship with Agnes, the whole architecture of who Skinner was, rested on the assumption that Seymour Skinner was Seymour Skinner. Not because the audience needed him to be literally who he said he was in some rigid technical sense, but because the emotional reality of the character required a stable foundation. The Vietnam experiences meant something because they happened to this person. The relationship with Agnes had weight because it was between a mother and her son. The dignity Skinner carried meant something because it was earned by a real person navigating a real life. The Principal and the Pauper pulled that foundation out. Suddenly, the Vietnam experiences happened to a man named Armin Tamzarian, who had then transferred them to a fake identity. The relationship with Agnes was between a woman and someone pretending to be her son. The dignity Skinner carried was the dignity of a fiction. Everything that had been built over 8 seasons was built on something that turned out not to be real within the show's own story. And then the episode resolved this by having the town simply decide to pretend it never happened, which is exactly what the show itself subsequently did. The critic and writer who articulated the fan reaction most precisely noted that the episode was offensive not in the way that causes moral outrage, but in the way that causes the specific pain of having something you cared about treated as though it did not matter. The show had spent 8 years asking its audience to invest in Seymour Skinner. The audience had done that. They knew his history. They understood his relationship with his mother. They had watched him navigate his life with a particular kind of resigned dignity that felt true and consistent and earned. And then the show told them in a single episode that the foundation of all that investment was a lie, and then told them to forget it and go back to pretending it was not. What The Principal and the Pauper revealed about where the show was by season 9 is something that fans have debated ever since. Some viewers use the episode as a clear marker of when the show stopped caring about internal consistency, about the idea that what happened in previous episodes should be respected by future ones. The show had always had a loose relationship with continuity. Characters' histories shifted sometimes, details changed. This was accepted as part of how the show worked. But The Principal and the Pauper was not a small continuity adjustment. It was a wholesale rewriting of a major character's entire identity, done not because the story required it, but because someone thought it would be an interesting twist. The interesting twist did not work. And its failure was not a quiet failure. It was a failure that the show's most loyal viewers felt as something close to a betrayal. Ken Keeler, who wrote the episode, has spoken about the reaction in interviews over the years. He has indicated that he understood the audience found it upsetting and has acknowledged the strong negative response. The show's later treatment of the episode, largely ignoring it, treating Skinner as Skinner without reference to Tamzarian, functions as a kind of silent acknowledgement that something went wrong, even if the show never formally admitted it in the way a person admits a mistake. There is a detail in the episode's ending that some fans find the most offensive part of all. The judge's order, declaring that the name Armin Tamzarian shall never be spoken again, is played as a joke. It is the show making a meta-reference to the idea that they are going to pretend this episode did not happen, winking at the audience as if to say, yes, we know, we are going to put this away now. Some viewers found this wink charming, a self-aware acknowledgement of the episode's problems. Many more found it the opposite of charming. It felt like the show admitting it had done something it should not have done, while simultaneously refusing to take that admission seriously. The joke landed as dismissiveness, as the show shrugging at its own mistake rather than actually engaging with it. The Principal and the Pauper is not offensive in the way a panda scene is offensive, or in the way a Tiananmen Square joke is offensive, or in the way Apu's accent is offensive. It does not cause harm to a real community. It does not disrespect a country or a historical event. It does not exploit something serious by pointing a laugh track at it. What it does is something that only a show with a long history and a deeply invested audience can do. It takes the loyalty of that audience, the years of attention and affection they have given to a character and to a fictional world, and it treats that loyalty as a resource to spend rather than a trust to honor. It uses the audience's investment as the raw material for a twist, without considering what that investment actually meant to the people who had given it. The show recovered. Later seasons produced genuinely good episodes. The audience mostly kept watching. Skinner went back to being Skinner. The world of Springfield continued. But The Principal and the Pauper stayed. It does not go away just because later episodes ignored it. It sits in the show's history as evidence of a particular kind of failure. Not moral failure, not creative cowardice, not cruelty. The failure of a show forgetting, for one episode, that its audience was not just watching. They were invested. They had given years of genuine attention to a world the show built. And a world that asks for that kind of attention owes something to the people who give it. The show forgot that for 42 minutes in September 1997. The fans have not forgotten since. And that, more than any government ban, more than any legal threat, more than any external controversy the show generated across 35 seasons, may be the most honest measure of what offense actually means for a show like The Simpsons. You can upset a country. You can anger a government. You can generate protest groups and parliamentary condemnations and tourism board lawsuits. All of those things are real and they matter. But the deepest offense is the quiet one. The one that happens inside the person watching. When something they trusted turns around and shows them that the trust was not mutual. That is what The Principal and the Pauper did. And that is why, nearly 30 years later, fans still bring it up. not with the heat of fresh anger, but with the particular, lasting disappointment of something that never quite got fixed. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.